The mysterious death of Cleopatra. The story they taught you in school was simple, wasn't it? Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, died by snake bite, an asp hidden in a basket of figs, a dramatic end befitting the queen who loved theater and spectacle. History called it suicide, a final act of defiance against Roman conquest. But what if everything you learned was a carefully constructed lie? They said she died by her own hand, choosing death over the humiliation of Roman chains. The story is romantic, tragic, perfectly suited to the legend of the woman who captivated Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. But legends are often more convenient than truth. What if the queen never chose death at all? What if the serpent was just a symbol, and the real venom came from somewhere far more calculated, far more political? Tonight, we're going to examine the death that changed history, not the myth they wrote in marble, but the mystery that disappeared beneath 2,000 years of Roman propaganda. Because when empires write history, they rarely write the truth. The question isn't how Cleopatra died. The question is, who needed the world to believe she killed herself? August, 30 BCE. Alexandria, once the jewel of the Mediterranean, was burning. Not with literal fire, not yet, but with the slow, inevitable destruction that comes when empires collide and one refuses to yield. Cleopatra VII Philopator, descendant of Ptolemy, ruler of Egypt for 21 years, stood in her palace watching her world crumble. The Battle of Actium had been lost a year earlier, the naval disaster that destroyed her fleet and Mark Antony's ambitions in a single afternoon of Roman tactical superiority. Her lover, her political ally, her last hope against Roman domination, Mark Antony was dead. The official account said he fell on his own sword when he heard false news of Cleopatra's death. Some whispered that she had orchestrated the rumor herself, a final betrayal to save her own throne. Others claimed he died in her arms, brought to her tomb while still breathing, hoisted through a window because she feared to open the doors. The truth, like so much else about that August, was lost in the chaos of an ending empire. Octavian, the future Augustus Caesar, Rome's first emperor, was marching toward Alexandria. His army was unstoppable, his intentions unmistakable. He didn't want Egypt's wealth destroyed in a siege. He wanted it intact, ready to fill Rome's treasury. And most importantly, he wanted Cleopatra alive. Not as a queen. As a trophy. Roman generals celebrated victories with triumphs, massive parades through Rome's streets where conquered leaders were displayed in chains before being ritually strangled. Octavian had already planned his celebration, and Cleopatra was meant to be its centerpiece, the proud queen dragged through Roman streets in golden chains, humiliated before a mob that would throw garbage and insults with equal enthusiasm. She knew this. She had lived her entire life understanding Roman politics, Roman psychology, Roman cruelty. She had been Caesar's lover, had borne his only son, had learned the language of Roman power from the man who perfected it. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that death was preferable to that particular form of immortality. The palace was a prison now, though the bars were made of Roman soldiers rather than iron. Cleopatra had retreated to her private chambers, the rooms that had once hosted the greatest minds of the ancient world, where philosophers and poets had debated under painted ceilings, where she had planned campaigns and alliances that almost changed history. Now those rooms held only silence and the smell of Egyptian incense burning low, trying to mask the scent of fear that no perfume could completely hide. With her were only two servants, Iras and Charmian. Not servants, really, companions, perhaps the only people left in Alexandria whose loyalty was certain. They had been with her for years, had witnessed her rise and now her fall, and had chosen to remain when others fled. Outside, Roman guards waited with the patience of men who knew the outcome was inevitable. They had been ordered to keep the queen alive and unharmed. Octavian's triumph depended on her living long enough to reach Rome. Cleopatra sent one final message, carried by a trusted messenger who slipped through passages known only to palace residents. The letter was addressed to Octavian, and its contents have been debated by historians for 2 millennia. Some sources claim she begged for mercy. Others say she asked only to be buried beside Mark Antony. Octavian's response, if he sent one, never arrived. Perhaps his silence was the answer. According to Plutarch, writing more than a century later, Cleopatra then requested a final meal. The guards, seeing no harm in feeding a woman about to become Rome's prisoner, allowed servants to bring a basket of figs, fresh from the royal gardens, a small mercy in her final hours of freedom. What happened next depends entirely on which account you believe. History says she smiled as the basket arrived. That she dismissed the servants and guards, claiming she wanted to bathe and dress in her finest robes before surrendering. That she wanted to look like a queen one final time. The guards, confident in their numbers and in the futility of resistance, allowed her this dignity. And hidden in that basket of figs, coiled among the fruit, was death wearing scales, an Egyptian cobra, the asp, symbol of divine royalty and protection. The same serpent that adorned the pharaoh's crowns, now repurposed as an instrument of final escape. The room fell silent. Incense smoke curled toward the ceiling. And in that moment, with Roman conquest literally waiting at her door, Cleopatra supposedly made her choice, death as a queen rather than life as a spectacle. When the guards finally entered, alerted perhaps by some noise, or simply by the suspicious length of her privacy, they found a scene that would be recreated in art and literature for the next 2,000 years. Cleopatra lay on her golden bed, dressed in her royal regalia. The linen was arranged perfectly, her crown still in place, her expression peaceful, almost serene. It was the image of dignified death, a queen choosing her exit on her own terms. On her arm, witnesses would later claim, was a small mark, 2 puncture wounds, barely visible, the signature of a serpent strike. Iris lay dead at the foot of the bed. Charmian was dying, still alive enough to reach up and straighten her queen's crown one final time before succumbing to the same venom. The asp itself was never found. Some accounts say it slithered away through cracks in the stone. Others claim the guards killed it immediately. Most scholars note that no one actually saw a snake at all. The entire serpent story comes from inference, assumption, and the convenience of a narrative that explained 3 simultaneous deaths in a locked room. Beside Cleopatra's body, they found a letter, her final words, addressed to Octavian. Ancient sources claim it contained only a single request, that she be buried alongside Mark Antony in her own tomb, the monument she had built overlooking Alexandria's harbor. And one more line, written in her own hand, tell him I died as a queen. Octavian, upon receiving news of her death, supposedly flew into a rage. His triumph was ruined. Without Cleopatra alive to display, his victory over Egypt would lack its most dramatic element. He sent physicians running to the chamber, desperately hoping they could revive her, but it was far too late. The official account was recorded, suicide by serpent, a death befitting Egyptian royalty. But historians, both ancient and modern, have never agreed on what truly happened in that room. The questions began almost immediately and have echoed through 2 millennia without resolution. Because when you examine the evidence carefully, the official story contains troubling inconsistencies. Consider the woman herself. Cleopatra was not some lovesick maiden who died for romance. She was one of the most politically astute leaders in ancient history, a woman who had maintained Egypt's independence against Rome for 2 decades through pure diplomatic brilliance and strategic alliances. She spoke 9 languages fluently. She was educated in mathematics, philosophy, astronomy, and medicine. When she met Julius Caesar, she had herself smuggled into his presence wrapped in a carpet, not because she was helpless, but because she understood theater and psychology. She knew how to make an entrance that would be remembered. This was a woman who had survived assassination attempts, palace coups, civil wars, and the constant pressure of Roman imperialism. She had outmaneuvered her own siblings, charmed Rome's 2 most powerful generals, and almost succeeded in creating an empire that could rival Rome itself. Would such a woman, a master of strategy who had spent her entire life fighting for survival, calmly invite death into her chambers the moment escape seemed difficult? Or would she fight until fighting became impossible? Some ancient writers expressed doubt about the official story even as it was being established. Strabo, writing within years of her death, noted that the truth of her death is unclear. The Greek historian Dio Cassius, writing 2 centuries later, recorded multiple competing theories, including the possibility that Octavian had her killed and staged the suicide. The evidence that troubles historians most: Egyptian cobras are large snakes, typically 4 to 6 feet long. How would such a creature be concealed in a basket of figs without being immediately obvious? How would it remain calm enough during transport to avoid striking the servants who carried the basket? And most puzzling, cobra venom, while deadly, doesn't cause peaceful death. It induces paralysis, respiratory distress, violent convulsions. Victims don't lie peacefully as if asleep, they die struggling for air, their bodies contorted by neurotoxins shutting down their nervous systems. Yet every account describes Cleopatra looking serene, almost as if she were sleeping. Her companions showed the same peaceful presentation. This is inconsistent with serpent venom but entirely consistent with certain plant-based poisons that were well known in the ancient world. Some Roman sources never mention a snake at all. They refer only to poison or venom, leaving the delivery method ambiguous. The simplest explanation, the one that makes Octavian's rage at her death make sense, is this: he needed her alive. When she died despite his precautions, he needed a story that made her death her own choice, not his failure. The serpent provided that story, dramatic, symbolic, politically convenient. Maybe Cleopatra didn't die that night in the way history records. Maybe the truth was too uncomfortable for Rome to acknowledge, that their greatest prize had slipped through their fingers, that a woman had defeated them one final time by choosing her own exit before they could script hers. Or maybe the truth is darker still, that she was murdered and the serpent was invented to hide political assassination behind poetic tragedy. We'll never know for certain. The evidence has been filtered through 2,000 years of Roman propaganda, romantic reinterpretation, and the inevitable distortions that occur when legends replace history. But perhaps that's exactly what Cleopatra would have wanted. She understood, better than most rulers in history, that power is perception. That the story people remember matters more than the facts they forget. That legends are more powerful than truth because they can't be conquered or contradicted. They simply exist, unchanging, in the collective imagination. If she truly chose her death, she chose it not just to escape Roman chains, but to control her own narrative one final time. The last Pharaoh of Egypt, dying in royal splendor rather than living in Roman humiliation. The woman who loved 2 of Rome's greatest generals, refusing to be paraded before Roman crowds like captured livestock. And if she was murdered, then her legend becomes even more powerful, a woman so dangerous that Rome had to kill her and then pretend she killed herself, because admitting they assassinated a queen was politically impossible. Either way, she won. Because history belongs to the victors. Rome conquered Egypt, absorbed its wealth, transformed it into a Roman province. Octavian became Augustus Caesar, first emperor of Rome, and his propaganda machine worked tirelessly to ensure his version of events became canonical truth. But legends belong to the people. And 2,000 years after her death, we still speak Cleopatra's name with reverence and mystery. We still debate her choices, her loves, her death. She remains more famous than most of the emperors who came after, more memorable than the generals who defeated her. Octavian wanted to display her in chains. Instead, she became immortal. The truth of that final night, the serpent, the poison, the choice or the murder, fades in importance beside the greater truth, that a woman born into a dying dynasty managed to write her own ending in a story she knew would be told forever. Maybe she died by her own hand. Maybe Rome killed her and lied about it. Maybe the truth is somewhere between those extremes, lost in the fog of ancient politics and imperfect sources. But the mystery itself has become her greatest power. Because as long as we're still asking how Cleopatra died, we're still remembering that Cleopatra lived. And that might have been her plan all along. Demasses Stories, stories for the people. Lessons for the soul.